Good evening, everyone, or afternoon. Is it afternoon or evening? Anyway, it doesn't matter. We're really happy to be here. It's been a year. It's great to see people. It's great to see you all here. Thanks so much for coming. We are the Videri String Quartet, and we were formed. So we were formed in 2012, and so over the last 13 years, we've had a lot of experience with MIDI and also with playing actual string quartets. So we just thought we would love to be able to share some things that we see very often, and it's really just like, how can we get the best arrangement possible by sharing our information with everyone we know? So we would love to share all the things that we know with you. How many of you guys arrange in here? Amazing. Ooh, I have another question. How many of you are string players? Okay, right. Nice. Okay, fantastic. We're gonna have fun. So over the last few years, we've really been like leaning into like branching out and getting more string quartets from kind of everywhere. We've been extremely lucky. We were able to visit Indiana University last spring and work with their video game music club and work with them on getting arrangements. So we ended up coming across similar issues. And the first one that I would love to talk about is keys. When you write in MIDI doesn't really understand what just tuning is. And those string players in here, we all understand it really well. We understand the natural harmonics, and different keys will speak to that. So one of the arrangements we ended up getting was Gusty Garden Galaxy. And I took a look at it. It's super da 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 da, super happy, right? And we got it, and it happened to be in the key of, what is that? I'm looking at it now. D flat major.
D flat major.
Oh.
And
there you go. It's up on the screen now.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And it's like and so one of my first comments, because here's the thing, it's like, we should be able to write in all. We're professionals. We should be able to play all keys, right? We can. Do we always want to? Not really. So the first thing I asked the arranger was, I asked him, I was like, do you have a reason? Like, why did you choose D flat major? And their response was, oh, that's the original key. I was like, okay, let's talk. Because of the natural harmonics, our instruments they love sympathetic vibrations. So anytime we can utilize those open strings, it's going to make it a much more resonant, much more like happy arrangement. So Gusty Garden Galaxy, if you want it to sound more happy, absolutely put that in D major. It's a really easy, I don't want to call it a fix. It's an easy solution for keeping the character intended of the piece, even though you're moving it out of the original key, but that's just to accommodate the strings.
And it's like, we're not saying that key is a bad key to write in. You can write in whatever key that you like. It's just, there has to be kind of like a reason why. With D flat majors, you were saying we enjoy using overtones, we enjoy using our harmonics, and for everything to be choked up, is kind of an issue if the only reason is because that's the original key. Now, if it was a color choice, then fine. But sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So.
And then the other thing you always have to be cognizant about is how accessible your arrangement is. If you're writing in D flat major, you're definitely not writing for beginners. Yes. So you're already limiting the people who are going to willingly approach your piece. So it's just writing in those any of the open string keys we love. So like C major I'm a violist. I love C major. All open strings.
Our instruments love it too. Our instruments are going to ring more, So you might have a more resonant recording like that.
Yeah.
For performance. But maybe you want to control it and have it more of a locked in, tight, not resonant sound, and maybe that's why you chose it, or maybe it was color, like Alan said. There's,
And so but the big thing about it is that when you listen to your MIDI playback, that's not going to help you with that at all. MIDI's going to play every key back the same. So be aware. That's my first.
Yeah, MIDI can play everything.
Yeah, MIDI can
not
play.
fair.
MIDI can play anything, even things it shouldn't play.
Which we'll get to in a sec.
This is not to say, and I'm gonna say something that probably all of my other fellow string players are gonna hate me for it, but
Oh no.
you could, let's say, really want D flat minor, D flat major, and you could want it to be very resonant, and all you would have to do is ask everybody to tune half step down.
Yeah, we're gonna hate
If
that.
everybody could still play their instruments, that's good.
It is fine. Like now, and
Tell
if
us
you're
about your
asking, also,
experience.
yeah, if you're asking, actually, I played a gig with Heard of Ensemble last weekend, and I just tuned it down. And I've played a lot of like Steve Reich pieces too, and Steve Reich, like, I mean, I love his music. He doesn't know how to write for strings. He just doesn't, you know. So
Can
like
confirm.
there are pieces that he writes that like they have like these long sustained notes. I'm thinking of 8 Lines, which is one of my favorite pieces, and I performed it years ago. But like all sustained notes, supposed to be resonant, and all of them are either flat or sharp. And so I just turned to my friends. I was just like, guys, like let's just tune half step down. It's fine. And they're like, you are crazy. Get out of here. But I tuned half step down, and it's fine. So that is an option. You just have to find a string player that's crazy enough to do it. And like, to be fair, always preferable to tune down than to tune up. And obviously, like, not by a lot. If you tune down a lot, like, you're gonna get like just a flobby sound. You just like need a different string at that point, different, for tension and stuff. Yep.
All right.
Sorry.
No, no.
You guys want to
That's
bring
it.
us
It's true.
to
It's
our...
an option. You're right. It's worth mentioning.
I actually really want to do that now. I'm secretly holding it back. I want to
Yeah.
try that next time I play in D flat major.
Yep.
I'm good, thanks.
Yep. It's an option.
So yeah, just be aware. We still play in just intonation as a string quartet, so just be aware of the harmonics when you're, or the harmony, the key. It's really the key. Be aware of the key you're writing in. And again, like, we absolutely don't mind playing in closed keys. I'm gonna say, just like that close our strings, but it should match the character. And if you want it to sound bouncy and happy, D flat major is not your key on strings.
Untypical tuning. Yes.
Oh, wow, now we're having to add all these caveats. Thanks, Mateus.
Just say.
Yeah.
Then one of the next things that I want to personally talk about, and that's because since I'm a cellist, is the use of ledger lines. And violinists don't really have a choice because they only have one key or one clef to write in. Violists and cellists, however,
We hate
ledger lines. And so people always ask us, they're just like, is this readable? Can you play this? And you have like 7 lines above the staff.
Me.
This is a
Sorry.
no violin comment right now. This is only for low strings.
And so to help the reader, to help the performer, it always helps us if there's too many ledger lines, write it in a different clef. At some point, like I think probably for alto clef above like a C above the middle, above the staff.
Are you a
A
fan
C,
of?
we're going with an A.
So Alan, are you a fan of tenor clef?
I love tenor clef.
Okay, would you rather read stuff like in all 3 different clefs, like?
Absolutely.
Or would you rather just have like either just bass or in treble? I've heard like from some cellists, they're like, oh, just do like bass and treble clef, like don't even go for tenor clef or something.
It's interesting because for cellos we read treble clef an octave down. And
Oh, read it an octave
we
down.
read it an octave down. And so technically, if it gets too high, for me at least, if it gets too high for tenor clef, then we'll obviously put it in treble clef. But we just don't want to read 14 ledger lines up in bass clef.
That would be probably in treble clef.
That would hopefully be in treble clef, yes.
You know what I tell people about this? Make friends with string players and then just show them your part.
Yeah.
Like, truly, if you know any violists, just like hand them your part and just be like, should I use treble clef? And they will tell you.
They'll tell you, yeah.
They will absolutely tell you.
Absolutely, yeah. Because it's like, especially if the music is already flying by, we already have to figure out what notes we're already playing. We don't want to have to do math above that. So,
On that same note, it's probably best to make sure we're all starting with clefs we can read also, right? Like MIDI,
that
you
is
can export
true.
whatever. I've gotten stuff that's just in other clefs before. I'm like, well, I can maybe get by in some bass clef, but none of this other stuff at all.
Yeah.
So that's another
Yeah.
one too. Make sure the
Absolutely.
clef is right for
The
your,
clef is right
for
in the
your
MIDI.
player,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
That also leads me to make sure it's playable. Like MIDI, like we just said,
yeah.
MIDI can play anything. We can't. What was the one that we wanted to show with that one?
Oh, the Colegno.
Yeah, can you bring up our Colegno?
Did we find a Colegno patch or not?
I could not find a Colegno MIDI patch.
Well,
So-
that's kind of going into like the about, or if you wanted to, but I was just gonna say, like, there's so many virtual instruments out there people get, right? You can get your MIDI Colegno patch. When you're doing this, you know, your stick on the strings. You can get your MIDI flautando, which, like, at this point, I don't even know what people expect flautando to sound like, because the patches are different from real performances, and real performances are different between people too. Flautando meaning flute-like, kind of a vague description anyway of how you should play. Think like a flute, play like a flute, like not really the best direction anyway, I think. But that's a whole patch you can download now, and a lot of composers will use these, and they'll just expect it to sound exactly like what they are used to hearing, because some people get married to the demo, you know? If you spend tons and tons of hours and days really making the demo sound great, it might sound really great, and then you might be so used to it when you have real players play it, you might start thinking, oh, I really want, like, I spent like 3 hours making the articulations here this one way. You can tell your players, you know, I want these articulations this way. They're still going to be able to interpret it with more flexibility versus like 5 hours of MIDI articulations and expression automation, you know?
And I'd like to add on to that too, because like that's happened to me quite a few times in recording sessions where they're like, no, play it like the MIDI, and they play back the MIDI, and what I'm seeing on my part is completely different notated than I would ever have interpreted it. And so it's like I'm suddenly having to, it's almost like reading like a different English. You know, it's like I have notes in front of me, so yeah, I have the pitches, but all the articulations that they've used are not at all. Staccato, that one I see all the time. And like, there's certain, like I've worked with certain arrangers where it's like I've started interpreting their staccato notes differently than other staccato notes. And so it's like every time we play an arrangement by this particular arranger, it's like, oh, we have to talk about that articulation. And it's because that made the MIDI sound like what they wanted it to. And it's like, in a sense, like we got there in the end, but every time like anytime that music goes to somebody else's hand, there's going to be a discussion. There's already way too many, like not way too many, but like we already argue about like Brahms sforzandos compared to other sforzandos. It's like there's already so much ambiguity about articulations. And as a classical string player, we get really hung up on like, but this is a staccato and this is a legato and it needs to sound like this. So when you're writing for strings, you have to understand that many of us are very rigid, and it's hard for us to not follow the rules that we were trained in. So to put an articulation that sounds different from what we're used to is very confusing, if that makes sense. I hope that wasn't confusing. You guys want to add
I was
on
just
to
going
that?
to say also, like, don't give us a piano staff. Don't give us a part that's like going partway up on bass and then switches to treble and back and forth. Don't give it to me. Maybe you could give it to them. Don't give it to violin though. I don't want to look at, because I can't do that. And I don't know many, you maybe can do that too, but I don't really know a lot of violinists, or maybe any, that can just sit there and like switch immediately from a line and bass clef to treble clef and back and forth,
Yeah,
which,
can
you know,
you
if you're
do that,
exporting
Alan?
from like Logic or something, just like a piano roll MIDI, that would be the typical thing that would print out. And that's going to be like, I'm not going to be able to use that. I'm going to have to sit there and like go through and transpose all of the bass clef stuff into treble clef. So that's another quick tool to make it a lot easier for us when we get the music.
That is true. Yeah, when some of the piano roll stuff that I have gotten from MIDI, it's all of my stuff has been in treble clef, and then all of a sudden it just switches into bass clef halfway through, and I'm just like, oh no, and then it goes back into treble clef, and I'm just like, what are you doing?
It's interesting because when I get it, it's usually like very switched because I'm
too.
right in the middle
Right.
of the staff, and it's
Yeah.
like I tried that once and I refused to record that person's music.
Like, let me just open the MIDI file in a notation software where I could put it all in treble clef. Then that would be easier.
Is
Then
there sound that comes out? Let me see. No, it's super soft.
It's really quiet.
on.
Quiet. Yeah, let me see. What happens if I crank these faders up?
I didn't notice anything.
Really?
Nothing.
Okay. What about these faders?
This is the MIDI version.
Oh,
Okay, that's the microphone.
so we know what those do.
That's the microphone. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, I'm the one like.
Now it's analog gear versus Videri.
What if?
It's changed.
New panel. Next panel.
We fight a lot of battles, apparently.
I mean, it is playing through the.
What are you doing?
Could you just put the microphone up against the computer speaker?
Oh. All right. let's do that. Okay. But it's gonna be very soft. It's soft through these speakers too. Let me see. I'll just set up. Okay. Speakers. All right. I'm always scared of this. Okay. This, I was okay. I just like wrote this down really quick.
It's not on the screen.
All right. Is it the other side?
There
There
you
it
go.
is. Oh wow, it's so small. Point, 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 point. Okay. Will this? Ugh. Okay. Will this play? Yeah, it's super quiet. How quiet is that? Very quiet. Let me try again. Can you guys hear some of it? Okay, cool, awesome. So anyway, I want. The idea was to illustrate some of like the articulation things, you know, like when we see that kind of notation in music, like we would play it much more articulated than your typical like audio unit or MIDI playback would play it back to you, you know. So
Mateus, could you just play how you would play that for
Eli
them?
could play it as I hold this.
You mean to play it like I know the song, or like I'm reading?
Yeah, like
'Cause-
if you just saw that, like how would you play it? Right?
Something like that.
And then the MIDI plays it. I mean it's like way more connected, right? It's more connected, and also it's a little hard. It's a little harder to hear the attack of each note, like on the computer sample, right? And so what composers will do very often is, in order to be able to hear it, let me see, what can I? They'll go here and they'll just be like, all right, I need to hear the attack of these notes, and then they just go like that,
And there's the staccato I'm talking about.
right? And then it's like, then the computer plays this.
Very
Right.
dainty.
So you hear a little bit more of the attack. You hear a little bit more of the attack, but when we read that in real life, it sounds like what?
Is that what
Yeah.
you want, or you want it less like that?
Anyway.
This would be after we all argue about
Like
what's-
why it's like that?
Well, what's the difference? But here's the thing: it's like, what's the difference between a quarter note and a quarter note with staccato on it, or an eighth note and a quarter note with staccato on it? Like, shouldn't you, if you want that to be staccato, shouldn't you have written it
Like
eighth note
quarter
rest,
of an eighth
and
beat,
then
yeah.
staccato? So it's like we would have already spent a lot of time being like, what is this quarter note with a staccato on it? At least I would.
I guess it also touches on like the MIDI playback. If you're writing for string quartet, you might be listening, unless you have a individual instrument patches, you're probably hearing more of an orchestral playback of your strings, which is going to give you a little bit of a false idea of how big and full it's going to sound when it's 4 instruments instead of an orchestra. You know, that's another one to consider as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing too is like, what's the goal of your DAW? Or not, sorry, the goal of your playback MIDI. Help me out with my
True,
terminology here.
Totally.
Like, what's the goal? Do you want to have a really great sounding playback, or do you want to have a really like
Like a great
clear,
reference for
concise
us?
score? And at this point, we're really, really good at looking at a score and being able to interpret what it will sound like. So you don't have to have an amazing playback when you give it to players.
Pull an example up?
I would love you to pull an example.
Oh, okay. All right. Can I find the example?
Should I say where it's from so we can talk about it a little bit?
Sure.
So this is actually, we did an arrangement competition last year, Goddess, which is featuring all female composers. And so in order to enter this, you had to send in the score and also a MIDI playback. And so this is one of the pieces that we selected for the album. And wait until you hear the playback once we find it.
Well, do you want to show the playback or the score first?
Could you do both?
Okay, also the score, actually, wait a second. Here it is. Oh, so.
We had
so
everything organized into a drive folder. Now the internet's not working, so we're having to download and find things.
So
Apologize.
This is it. And the interesting little part is this here. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what am I playing first? Am I playing the MIDI?
Why don't you play the MIDI? So this is what we got, and this was our reference point
Oh boy.
when we like this. Here's the score we had, and then you're gonna hear the MIDI.
Here's the MIDI. If it loads, is it loading? Yep.
Dramatic.
So that's what you heard, right? That's like jarring. Now, we got super excited because what this means, these scribbles on the page, what it meant to us was really different from what we heard, and we knew that. So do you want to play what we were hearing in our heads when we heard the MIDI playback?
Yeah, I wish we could like show the Insta360 video from yesterday because that sounds like actually pretty decent. Okay.
We actually performed this at a concert yesterday, and we listened back and we're like, this is what we wanted. So
All right.
we're really happy with it.
Here's the scratch mix one.
So we knew we could make that sound like Cars immediately.
And the arranger had confidence that we could make it sound like Cars as well. So we got there, right?
And he just sent us this, and he didn't even say anything about it. But the fact, again, we know, as string players will know. And so it's like, why spend the time trying to get a MIDI track to sound perfect when you should spend the time just talking to your players, if that's your end goal? Again, I don't want, I'm sure there's a space for incredible MIDI tracks. So please, I don't want to say that that's never an option or never a good option.
Yeah.
This is more about MIDI for when writing for real players, though. What we're talking about.
Oh
right?
yeah. I mean, you know me, and I don't know about writing anything. I interpret things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you guys have any questions about anything we've said before we move on?
We like questions. Bryce.
Yeah, you just got to talk about writing different clefs. Would you prefer just 8-va for the lower strings specifically, or is that worse?
Oh God, that's way worse. Yeah. I have to read everything. I end up in bass clef. I've had to read treble clef an octave down, which has been my least favorite.
That's hard.
Because we were sight reading Bach chorales. They didn't. It was for something else. But but it's like you and then the for me, this piano staff, like, and this happened when I was playing recording sessions in Boston, and one of the parts that showed up on my stand was like half bass clef and half treble clef, and it would be like 16th notes, like dot 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 dot, and I like, even the teacher of the class I was recording for, he's like, you don't need to do this. And I was like, I could, but it would take practice. He's like, you're not paid enough for this. And that like, that wasn't for Videri, but like really it's like when we're having to like decipher things that like we already, it's not even decipher, it's translate what the arranger meant based off the MIDI sound. It can be really, really hard for us to do that. So it's just like trying to it's really like trying to speak in a similar language, and the MIDI doesn't understand that language. It just it's really like it just puts everything in monotone. So it's like another, yes, Tony.
I was also going to mention that MIDI doesn't get tired.
Oh God, yeah, that's a big one.
I have a good example of excellent writing.
Okay, I'm going to take Tony's question while you find that.
If you're like not a string player and you're trying to arrange for strings, is it a better approach to like try to write out articulations or to write out no articulations and then give it to the string players and like give them a reference and be like, hey, make it sound like this?
We love that, honestly. Like any, like even if you write something and they're like, one of my favorite arrangements actually, it was one of the first ones we got, but it was a Monkey's Island, theme from Monkey's Island. And she put all these little like, sweetly, like a banana, like all throughout it. And it would, like mysteriously,
Yes.
like lost treasure. And it was just like all these little, like we knew exactly how to play. So it's like if you don't know, like if you don't know, what's a random string articulation? Like, if you're not sure what like
Bartok pits.
Bartok pits, like you don't know what a Bartok pits is. It's the snappy. Do you want to give us a Bartok pits, Eli?
Yeah, a regular one is just right. Bartok is those ones that snap against the fingerboard, kind of like that.
Yeah.
One important note is that like usually to do the Bartok pits, it requires you to use your thumb to pull the string up, and to snap against the fingerboard. And so like double stops, Bartok pits, like you kind of would need two thumbs. It is possible to get like two fingers under and then pull the strings up, but it's like I don't know. I'm not very.
I can do it on a viola. I don't think
Right.
it's possible.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I know what you mean.
Yep. I've seen that before.
But like if you don't know what that's called, but you're just like you write a pits, you're like snap pits. We'll absolutely just be like, oh, Bartok pits, and we'll add the Bartok pits in. I do think a lot of times too, it's like we will like interpret articulations based off of what makes the most sense. And so it's like if you want like a legato passage and it's like what they'd written up there, if you want it connected, right legato, we'll just play everything connected until we see normale.
Yeah.
But really just using like the words that you know how to describe it, what you want, I think is more effective than trying to put an articulation that you're unsure of. And
Yeah, I think that's the point right there, right? Like if you're certain about what you want and you're confident in it, it's good to put it there, but don't put staccato markings over every single note, the whole piece, Like, yeah, it is helpful to have some articulations, especially if you have an idea about what you want it to be, I think.
It's always good to use articulations as a way to guide rather than to complicate things.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So.
Really, it's like we're having to process so many things all at once. And it's like I don't play an orchestra often. I've started playing in it more, and I get like really upset when my stand partner like puts excessive bowings in the part. And it's like it's just like that extra little bit of information that you're having to process. And so it's like if you don't need it, don't put it in. That being said, it's like we live in this incredible age where it's like just email people. Like, we have these resources where, like, I think one of the things that we've been talking about is like, we've been translating MIDI for the last 13 years. And it's like, we see the same things. It's like, let's talk about it. Let's like, we want to share like information. That doesn't stop when we leave this room. It's like we love what we do, and it's like we want to be getting amazing video game string quartet arrangements out to the world because there are not enough of them. So the more we can help bridge that communication between arrangers and players.
Mm-hmm. Things that our instruments can do very well, and especially for those of you whose primary instruments are keyboards, or sometimes maybe like a reed instrument where like repeating notes is kind of like okay, like I don't know how fast I can repeat notes because it needs to double tongue, or like the piano has to go like da, 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 da. That doesn't, for us, that is something that's very easy to do. Like we don't get tired of just going like tak 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 dig 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 dig. It's like, because we are basically cheating all the time, like with one motion that we go up and down, like we play two notes, right? So you can imagine in the piano, if it would go like tuku, 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 it would be like the equivalent, right? So that is totally fine. What is not as fine is, let's say, I want to play like a huge scale, like super, super fast, like up and down, or an arpeggio, super, super fast up and down, or like repeat a pattern that it like is taxing on the left hand, like going like, okay, like you can do that for like a bar or two, like of four, like think of like maybe like a few seconds, and then like you need to give your player like a little bit of rest, right? And then the way that good composers do that is they will pass that around, right, between the ensemble. So it will be like, oh, I can rest for like 3 times the amount that I have to play, right? So I was just gonna put like a little bit of like, this is nope.
The other thing that does, as he looks for that, I'm gonna add into that because I love this type of thing. Like, and again, MIDI, if you're trading like da ya da ya da ya da ya, and then Eli takes it, MIDI's not going to make any differentiation between that. It's just going to sound like one person, and so a lot of times you just put it in one person because it doesn't sound different. But when you're actually trading those parts, it's like it's a conversation. Mm-hmm. It's dialogue between the two parts because I'm going to be informed by what he's doing, but more importantly, I get a break. I'm a violist. I have to stretch farther. It's really hard to play certain things over and over and over, and a lot of times everyone's like, oh, the viola would be great playing these running 16th notes. So just split them up.
Yeah, there's a little bit that I put there. I don't know if, I know it's tiny, but it's from the Nutcracker. And what I wanted to show here is like this awesome thing here. There's like this great scale that like starts in the bass. You see how it's passed around, right? Bass, cello, viola. Well, bass, cello, first violins, then the first violins rest, then violas go, then second violins play, then first violins play very high, but they had like all of this time to rest and then like find those notes up there, right? And then like flutes and piccolos and oboes, like they take over. That's like, I'm gonna try to play like the audio from that. Let me see if I can find it.
But anytime we're doing that type of thing, it does a few things. It's like if you're those violins, if you had been a lower string and you just played the whole thing, the violins would have checked out by now. But if you have to come in, it becomes like you're part of the dialogue, and it's really, really like, it's more fun. It's really fun to play stuff like this because you have to be connected to the rest of the group. It's like forcing that connection, which chamber music is all about.
Yeah, here it is.
Oh yeah. And like that just sounds so effortless. And if you tried to have the viola play more of that, not effortless.
Another interesting point about this scale is like it finishes on a high B, which is also a natural harmonic for the violin E string. So it's like fun to play. You can like hit that high B, it will like resonate like crazy. You go like wow, and it's awesome. If it were a B flat, it would literally just, the sound would go like, like it would literally just die. So, yep. Yeah. Going back to the beginning of the panel.
It's all about the resonance. And that also goes, like, the other thing that ends up happening a lot when we get MIDI is that because we're not hearing all of these natural overtones, like especially in like filled out, like slower parts, it makes it so if you get to a slow part in a MIDI track, it feels really empty because you're not hearing all of these natural overtones. And so very often, you just add more notes to fill in that space. And so you end up with just these incredibly notey arrangements that are not giving the instrument time to speak, because it's like when you're working in the MIDI, you're trying to fill in all those overtones by adding more notes. And that does a few things. It makes it really hard to play because you're all over your instrument. You're having to like just constantly play. The instrument itself is not being able to ring because every time you play a new note, you're stopping that ring. And it's also just hard. And so it's like you could do interlocking rhythms. Again, like, I play a lot with Eli, violin too, viola, we play a lot together. But like have them do like da 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 da, viola da 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 da. You've cleaned up your rhythm, you've removed certain notes, you're giving the instrument a chance to respond a little better. You're also forcing, like, if we're not together and we're trying to play interlocking rhythms, it's a mess. It's like, and it's like easier to not play together when you're playing all 16th notes. Like you can check out. It's like you really can just go onto autopilot where it's like you're interacting with those rhythmic parts. It gives the arrangement just like such energy. And you're not going to hear that on a MIDI, like a MIDI track at all.
Whoa. Why are the lines so small?
Is there any question?
Yeah. Also, please write this way. Write this way. This way, and not. Where is it? There to go. Okay. Well, it's gonna give me a.
Put it in the next measure. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. Okay, and not this. Right? Yeah.
We don't like that.
Dun ta ta dun ta ta dun is like eighth note plus 2/16, and I know. And if we go back to like the typical playback of a notation software, right? Usually that notation software will play back like da 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 da. But like when we're playing it live, we play dun ta 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 dun. It's like it's shorter, But like putting a 16th note rest, and then like that just convolutes so much. Like I mean. When a player would have to like read it first and then just be like, oh, okay, I see what the composer wants, and then like they'll be able to play. But if you wrote it the first way, any professional player would the first time like get it right.
Oh yeah.
Immediately. So
the other thing, and I think one of the things about that is that we're going to let the natural ring take care of the end of that first eighth note. We're just going to do that naturally. The MIDI won't. It'll play through the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we've already accommodated for that.
Yes. Nice.
That's all.
Any more questions?
We got some more questions.
I'm going to Tony, and then I'm going to go to back here.
I have a three-part question. Why do string players hate double stops? Second, when is it okay to use double stops? And third, like which intervals are better than others?
Great question.
I have a lot of things to say.
So Tony's asking, why do string players hate double stops, meaning two notes at a time on two strings like that? What was the second part you said?
When is it okay?
When is it okay to use double stops? Which intervals are easier or harder? That's a great question for sure. Did you want to start with that, or?
I can dive in right away, actually. I actually love double stops in solo playing, hate double stops in quartet. And the reason for that is that I am often having to tune to other things around me. So I can't tune to my own instrument. There's a part of one of the pieces we're playing where it's like, I actually have to change the note that I'm holding for it to make sense in the chord. I'm sure I'm playing the third in this particular instance.
It's all Alan's fault, really.
But what that ends up doing is it makes it so that I can't always trust which, like I would not be, it's hard to practice double stops in a quartet on your own because I don't know which part I need to tune to. Like when I'm playing solo music, that is just me. I'm not listening to something else for a chordal structure. Now, that being said, absolutely use double stops. right? Like I don't want them to stop being there, but it's like if you're going to write a very lyrical passage with double stops, not advisable unless one of them's a drone on an open string. But as far as like, yeah, I'm like that's my comment about that.
Yeah, by default, we're always tuning to the lowest note, or whatever is the root, right, of chords, and then like you will hear that like, oh, like double stops are usually easier if you can incorporate an open string, right? And that is somewhat true. At the same time, like, you know, so putting an open string, for example, on an instrument like the violin, while the cello has some other note, that means that we can't necessarily adjust that open string, right? Unless like maybe we can go up. We can go up. That's the only option. If we like finger the open string a little bit, right, you can go up. But like we can't go down if it's necessary to have, for example, like the major third of a chord. Like we want to be a little bit flatter. And then in that case, like if we have a big old open string, right, and you know Alan is playing a note where it doesn't really tune to that open string, even if that open string is technically in tune, then like we have to stop and go like, okay, Alan, like I have a big old open string here, like, and then he goes like, oh, okay, and then he like changes where he puts that note, marks in his music, right? It's like this one has to be a little bit lower or higher because of stupid like, Mateus's open string. And so
we're constantly having to adjust and tune every single note we're playing.
Yeah.
So when you have two notes that you're trying to adjust, it's really hard.
And then both of those to everybody else.
And so it just makes it, the other thing that it does is that when you have two notes down, it does a few things. Like you're stopping a string, you're getting rid of all those sympathetic vibrations. So it's like you're suddenly not accessing an entire string's worth of extra sound.
That's a great point. So like, that's a common misconception. Like people usually think like, oh, I'm going to write two notes now and then this violin is going to sound twice as loud. And
it's not true.
The reality is actually you're splitting the overall potential vibration of this box of wood into two different fundamental frequencies, right? So you actually end up with two softer notes than with one note that is louder. That's just pure physics.
Yeah, and certain if you're getting super nerdy, and I apologize, if you're going to be accenting the natural overtone series, so if you wanted to throw a fifth or an octave in there, that's going to make it a lot louder because you're feeding into that series. But again, like octaves for viola, we have to do this. Like I should just show you on the instrument. And then for every note, I'm having to move up. So it's not easy, but it's also like, use double stops in certain spots, but realize that it's not like melodically, it's not going to make it, it's going to make it harder. Like it also, because our vibrato is so wide, if we have two fingers down, it stops that vibrato.
It becomes much narrower.
So it just like really limits what we're able to do with our vibrato and our expressiveness.
Mm-hmm. And typically also the bigger the instrument, the thicker the strings, the wider the positions get, and so it becomes your hand becomes locked.
And then it's also our action is much higher than the violins, even a viola. So even the pressing the string down. Yeah. Like when I was still in college, I love the Bach partitas and sonatas, the violin, and especially the E major. And I was like, I'm going to learn this. So I learned it down a fifth. And after playing it for like 2 weeks, my teacher asked me to stop because I was giving myself tendinitis. Just because you're so much higher pressing these strings down and that action, it's not worth it. It's like, it wasn't written for the cello or viola. It was written for the violin.
Now, does anybody want to tackle which double stops are good?
Yeah.
You do?
Okay, let's start. Double stops that are good on violin, right? So if we start with like unison, that's already really hard because it's a big stretch, especially down low. The higher up you go, the notes get closer, right? So double stops get a little bit easier sometimes, but that's a big stretch for anybody, I think. So that's already a hard one. In terms of the next one would be seconds, I guess, right? It's
also
not as
hard.
hard, but it's not a great one either because it's hard to hear and tune it as well. So that one's tricky just from like a hearing standpoint, but also on violin, it's using my index and pinky finger to do it. Not like anytime the pinky's in there, it's already getting a lot harder, right?
Can I do a little analogy?
Sure.
My favorite analogy is this. So like the violin, all these instruments are tuned in fifths, right? I like to think like, okay, so fifths. Violins, I think even cello, yeah, like every fifth we play by default with just one finger.
We didn't get to fifths
right?
yet. Let me
But
get
wait,
to fifths.
but one finger,
Let's
right?
get there.
It's tuned into fifths.
We're not
And
even
then
at
the,
thirds
the
yet.
thing is this. I mean, if I could stand in this table, I would, but I'm not going to do that. But like, okay, so fifths, and then like at any interval kind of above that, I like to think as if you had just like your feet just like in a kind of more natural position, right? So like your hand is like this, for violins is like this, your hands are like this. So when you do a sixth, your feet is like this. When you do a seventh, like this. When you do an octave, it's also like this. Now, lower than a fifth is almost like your feet are doing these, right? So because tuned in fifths, now your finger has to cross over to the string before. So like instead of your feet being like this, now your feet go like that, right? And so unisons are like this, seconds are like this, thirds are like this, fourths are like this, right? Fifths, one finger, one feet.
We
I
don't
know,
like fifths. Don't write us fifths.
Yeah, but does that make sense? I think that's a good analogy. Now the thing is like, fifths are usually okay to write if they're in lower positions, right? Because we're only using one finger, and the higher that you go, the more difficult it is to tune. So, yeah, here you go. I'm gonna sound like crap. So here, first position, fifth, only one finger. Right here, it's already kind of.
And the problem is you only have one finger and you're having to change where that is on both strings at the same time.
Yeah, and I'm doing like micro adjustments as I'm going up, but it's like there comes a point like around like maybe a fifth above the open string or higher above the open strings. That is so impossible to tune. And then you will see cellists doing this thing like all the time. They're like to try to tune the fifth. They're like, with one finger, they're like, wait, this is not in tune. Then they go like,
Yep.
yes. Alan likes it.
It's a pain. It's a pain.
And the other thing too is like,
Sorry, I cut you off.
these instruments are super sensitive to the weather. Anytime we're on stage,
I was gonna get to
our strings are changing. So anytime we're playing double stops, we're having to accommodate two different strings that have definitely changed at different levels during our performance. And so it's like you're always, always, always having to accommodate. So it's like if you only have to do that for one note, your stress level goes way down.
Sorry,
There was another question
No,
that I
it's
want to
okay.
make sure to get to. Did you want to add, Eli?
No, let's get to questions, yeah, because we're entering our last 10 minutes.
Okay, I know that there was a question back here. Yes, with the mask. Yeah. What?
Yeah,
Sorry.
So, as like a cello player and somebody who loves low end stuff, I've seen a lot of really boring like bass parts and low end stuff. I'm sure you get that as a viola player as well. Like, what's some of your favorite things to make like the low end and the bass and sort of the midsection like more enjoyable as a player?
I mean, one of the things, actually, I mean, you give everybody an interesting part. Like one of that is a great thing to say
That's one of the
too.
first things that we look when we're looking at an arrangement, like if we need to decide like, all right, like, how will we rate this arrangement? Like, one of the first things we look is like, okay, does the cello ever get the melody?
Does the viola ever get the melody?
The viola, exactly.
Does
yeah.
violin too get the melody? One of the easiest ways to do that, just look at your parts. Like just look through the individual parts before you send it anywhere. Like, because again, like the Monkey Island arrangement that we love, everything was in the first violin when she first sent it over. And I didn't even say anything other than I was like, go back and look at each individual part. And the second you looked at the second violin part, da 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 da, the whole time. Like that's all that they'd given that. And it's like just sharing the melody around and having call and response has made that an arrangement that we perform regularly. So yeah, it's like, and kind of there's something that we I don't know if this iteration of Videri has talked about it a lot, but I used to talk about it a lot like 5 years ago, where it's like there's arrangements that sound good and there's arrangements that are fun to play. They can be the same. They don't have to be the same. Some of the ones that are really fun to play probably aren't the strongest we have. We play them a lot more than the ones that are not fun to play. So it's like, if the part's not fun, we're not going to play it as much. And so it's like always figuring out ways to just include all the parts. It doesn't have to be the melody. Sometimes it doesn't work.
Sometimes it could be like a funky rhythm that you can
Oh,
change
yeah.
up, you know? A lot of the times I will get arrangements where it's just I just have half notes for 5 minutes straight. And, you know, sometimes adding like a couple scales here and there, you know, adding a couple fun rhythms, depending on the context of the piece. Obviously, we're not putting funky rhythms in Pachelbel's canon.
Don't be afraid to cross voices.
not?
Like some
Yeah.
of the coolest, there's a Beethoven, Haydn. I don't remember which one, but it's like where I get to be the bass and the cello is like playing above the viola. It's really fun. Like that type of thing. And it sounds so great because it's suddenly like this like, oh, like it's a little bit different of a, yeah.
It's a shift of color.
So it's like if you're looking at your cello part and there's nothing and it's not that great, maybe mess with your octaves. Like maybe try to change it up a little bit, you know, like do something crazy and just see where it takes you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm a piano player, but I usually try to learn to compose for orchestra. So like the thing is like when I'm researching like more advanced piano stuff, it's like I understand because it's my main instrument. I understand how the hand moves and how these harder techniques will play. But if I'm trying to understand that for making like solo stuff for violin, how would I go in approaching something like that? Because it's not like I can just like learn like the entirety of the violin to understand how like what hand movements are comfortable.
Right. I mean, honestly, I think really the best thing to do is score study and write things and play it and ask people to play them.
Yeah,
Because
ask friends.
and like ask people to play it and ask for feedback. You know, it's like I know right now that like anything written by Paul Hindemith for viola is amazing. Look at it. Like if you want to know how the viola works, look at his stuff. Like there's Schwanendreher. You look at it and you're like, this is going to be impossible. No violist could ever play that. It's super easy. He was a violist. Everything just fits in the hand. So it's like really, there's no way I think to like know it unless you do it really. Like, but just ask other people because I feel like even like way before I was in Videri, I've been playing composers' music and it's like, I love working with live composers. It is so much fun. One of my favorite things I ever did was my first year in my master's, I wrote a piece, like I didn't write it. The composer wrote it, but it was like he would write a section, I would learn it and come back and play it for him and we'd talk about it. It was an incredible experience. So people love collaborating. Like, they, you know, like they don't have to be the best person ever. Just go ask opinions. Don't listen to one opinion. I sometimes say things that are true for myself, but not for other people.
Yeah. Another way of thinking about it is, you know, like if you have any friends that play violin or if you have any pieces that you really like the violin of those specific pieces, then you just go like, ooh, I really like this one thing. How does that work? And see if you can look up the music for that. Like, you know, if it's public domain, it's on MSLP, you can just like take a look at the score, see how it works. Yeah, like sometimes you hear something that sounds very, very difficult and all it is like, you know, a violinist like doing this and then keeping like a hand shape.
Yeah, that's something too, where it's like listen to concerti, especially because like concertos are where it's like that's like the, you know, you're trying to impress people. Like especially if you want to listen to things that are really easy to do, go and listen to like the student concertos, like the ones that people are first learning, like the Sight student concertos. Those are easy to play. They sound really, really, really like advanced. There's lots of double stops. There's lots of like fancy bowings, and it's like looking at that and being like, oh, this is all easy to play. It'll give you a place to start from like all these things are accessible by people playing at about 5 years of playing.
Yep. Time for probably just one more question. Yeah.
I just need a thumbs up or thumbs down on a version of Pachelbel's canon where the chili and all that have all the interesting parts of the violin have all of the whole notes.
We would play it. I feel like Like any, if you
sounds
put,
cool.
yeah,
We would
I
read
would
it.
love that.
I'm in.
I know, and it's like you say that, and it's like sometimes at weddings, like I play a lot of weddings in the summer, and I play with a cellist a lot, and sometimes we'll be like, "Do you want to? I'll take your notes, you."
Yeah.
I like it.
Yes.
Yeah, probably.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, we got a few minutes left, if so.
If the part's really simple, would you guys be open to like improvising a bit?
Question was, if the part's really simple, would we be open to improvising a bit? I think we would be, but not necessarily every player would be. If you want to.
It's so interesting. Like, you know, I teach in higher ed, and then like every time we have like high school students or younger students come in, I'll like do a little workshop with them, and then like I'll teach them, okay, like you guys play these notes, you guys play these notes, okay, now do this little rhythm, and it's basically like the same chords from the like Super Mario Star theme, you know, so it's like just. Right, and kind of like play it in a bossa nova style, and then like, all right, okay, now we're just gonna improvise a little bit. And as soon as I say the word improvise, like you see like the panic, like just seep
Oh,
in the
yeah.
faces
Lots
of these
of panic.
young students, right? And like I was just like, okay, and then they're like, no, please don't make me improvise, no.
Please don't
and,
make
and,
me
And I'm
improvise.
like, any note in C major, any note will sound great. Like it's fine. Just play one note. Just one note. And then like, you know, sometimes they're like, okay, I'm gonna play one note. And then like they just choose a note and they play it and it sounds good. And they're like, oh. And then you see immediately, you know, like their faces change to like, oh, this is actually not that bad. You know? And it's like, if you think about it, it really isn't that bad. It's just because, you know, we're so trained to like follow the print so closely.
Play
but
the
like,
ink.
Yeah, and you know, but improvising is the bridge between performing and composing, right? It is that's what connects the two, and it's like we always encourage, and we have composers and arrangers come to us all the time, like saying like, hey, would you guys be up for improvising? So that's something like they ask, right? Because it's something that is still not expected of people of our training, and we always say.
So what I would say to that is like, I absolutely think you should put it in there, because I do think that improvisation really is coming back and should be coming back, and it's like we should just be able to pull out our instruments and play something. But if you want to make it less scary, put in like a parenthesis, like, or you could play this, like a really simple melody. Even if you put in a really simple melody with like, you know, kind of like suggesting that it's like start. It's more of a like start here, and then you could either ignore that or not. Like that might solve the, you know, because it's like, I know that like Eli and Mateus, if they thought improv, like, and I play with another violinist who has a jazz background, and it's like when we get to improv sessions and I'm playing with any of them, it's exciting because what happens in that moment it's been inspired by what we did earlier. It's like such an it's creating art in the moment, and it's like you respond to it, and it's like I can sometimes do a little bit of improv if I'm like inspired like that. And so if you make it accessible, like even just putting like in a lead sheet of just to give somebody like, okay, just start here, play this, then go off of it.
Oh yeah, if you include chord symbols, that's amazing. That's awesome. Yeah. But yeah, so I think like to just more directly answer your question, if the part is simple, like somebody like Eli and I would definitely like improvise on it. Like we would play maybe like a couple of bars, and if we see that the thing repeats and it's very simple, we'd just be like, all right, yeah, like then
even putting something like ad lib. If you put an ad lib over a melody, we'll improvise over it. It's like those little words give us the freedom to like add in the trills and all the things. At least for me, I'm very classical background.
But yeah, I guess like in the end, just at least give like an option for people who are not necessarily comfortable with improvising, an option that they can play.
Yes.
As well, yeah. So
I think that like solves the issue of like people not playing it if it has improv in it.
5 o'clock.
Yeah, we are out of time.
Thank you for being here.
Thank
you all
for
so
being
much.
Here. We are performing tomorrow in one of the orchestra spaces at 5 p.m. So come hear us play. Come hear Rainbow Road in the flesh.